Hello and welcome to Rotted Reviews, and today I'm behind the desk, so you can already tell something's a little different. This isn't going to be a straight-up movie review, and it's not going to be horror-based, but I did recently watch Zack Snyder's Justice League, and I wanted to talk about it. And I actually did record some of this in front of the green screen, but it didn't feel right. I wanted it to be a little bit more conversational since this isn't a straight-up movie review. But I just kind of wanted to discuss, pros and cons, what I thought about it, and so forth, address some of the internet fervor. For those of you that aren't in the know about what this whole shebang is, Zack Snyder originally directed Man of Steel, then Batman vs. Superman, and then Justice League. And he got so ways into directing Justice League when unfortunately family tragedy struck when his daughter Autumn committed suicide, and he was forced to leave the project because, well, he was tending to his family and mourning and so forth. And the studio decided, instead of pausing production and so forth, which, makes sense. It's a high dollar. You have just a bunch of people all involved with this project. It's not like you can just, hit the timeout thing without costing literally millions of dollars, at least. So the studio decided that instead of pausing things, they would hand over the directorial reins to Joss Whedon and task him with finishing the project up. And he came in and did rewrites, did reshoots and so forth, and released the film in 2017 to some pretty mild reviews, to say the least. I don't think it was, even to a lot of very generous fans, it wasn't what they had envisioned and what they were hoping for out of a Justice League movie. And bear in mind that a lot of this was coming on the coattails of Marvel's cinematic universe and what they had done with the Avengers and so on. So there was a high bar to reach, much less leap over. And there were a lot of things that were faulty about the 2017 release of the Justice League. There was the whole mustache gate thing, where one of the reshoots that, several of the reshoots that they had to go through to accommodate the changes in the script was bringing Henry Cavill back to be Superman. The problem was he was already working on a different project in which he had a mustache. And rather than have him shave it, because he still needed to keep in time with that production, he couldn't just, slap on, well, I guess they could have slapped on a prosthetic and probably would have saved a bunch of money, but who knows how real it would have looked, or grow a mustache in that amount of time. They decided to digitally remove it and film his scenes with the mustache present, digitally remove it, and it wound up pretty squarely in Uncanny Valley territory. His mouth did not look right when he was speaking in those scenes. It was very apparent where those moments were. So, in the wake of all of this, a lot of fans came forward and said, we want Zack Snyder brought back into the project and recut what he had already done and release it as a director's cut of his vision. We had a lot of traction with that because we had the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2 come out. That's its whole other thing I'm not going to get into here. But there was a lot of push for getting somebody that clearly loved the genre, loved the medium, and loved the characters, and wanted them to finish off this project. So the hashtag release the Snyder cut was a huge thing. And honestly, it looked like it wasn't going to happen. It looked like it was just one of those internet fandom things that was a pipe dream, and, we'll see what happens from there. But it was announced in May of 2020 that indeed the Snyder cut would be released. But then there became a matter of some debate and conjecture and so forth about how much footage Zack Snyder did versus how much Joss Whedon did, how much was actually in the can that could be recut. Would we simply just get some added scenes or some altered scenes of pretty much the same movie, so on and so forth. And I don't think that anybody really expected what we wound up getting, which was just released yesterday, which was a 4-hour cut of the movie presented in standard format, not quite, I don't think 4:3 format, but definitely not widescreen format of Justice League, brought to us as the original vision of Zack Snyder. And what also became apparent is that of that 4 hours, a massive amount of it was filmed by Zack Snyder. It became very apparent how much was removed from the 2017 release and how much was filmed before the tragedy struck and Joss Whedon got brought in, and how much material Joss had to work with before deciding to make all the changes that he did. And that's generally about where things stand. I wanted to discuss it in more of a casual format. It's still going to be spoiler free, so don't worry about that. I can manipulate my words so that I'm not discussing any specific points and so forth. But even so, I did want to discuss it because I'm seeing a lot of internet debate about generally. Some people are railing on Zack Snyder, about the format, about the 4-hour-long thing, about this or that, and so forth. And I think to an honestly unfair level. And some people are going the opposite way and saying Zack Snyder is a god and so forth. Again, in my opinion, to an unfair level. I like to meet in the middle, and I like to see things in shades of gray. So I wanted to pipe in with my opinion. First and foremost, I want to say two things. First of all, in my opinion, Zack Snyder is an interesting director. I don't really take a whole lot of issue with him or his style, but just speaking candidly, I think that he's much better with moments than he is with scenes. I think he's better with scenes than he is with characters, and I think he's better with characters than he is overall movies. And by that, I mean the moments that he creates are stupendous. They are the slow-mo action shots of a grand moment with just the perfect soundtrack chosen for accentuation of that moment. Actually coming up with compelling scenes in which we get interested in characters and their development and their arcs and so forth and get surprised by clever writing, not quite so much. And then for an entirely finished movie in which we have complex characters with well-written scenes and interwoven fabric of different levels of perception and so forth, even less so. But sometimes a movie made up of moments can still work. And of those grand moments, I do think that superhero franchises are about the most forgiving in terms of patching those things together for an hour and a half. I think that he's limited a bit by script with The Watchmen, which I think was a fantastic movie. He benefited from having a very solid foundational groundwork laid. With other things like Man of Steel and so forth, I think that there was a little bit, the idea of Superman and his origin story and so on is something that has it has the bones there, but it allows for a lot of interpretation. And I think in that, there was some of the character that was kind of lost in that translation. I wasn't really entirely on board with his vision. I didn't really like the time fracturing of bouncing back and forth, but that's neither here nor there. And then Batman versus Superman, I have my own issues with. I think that there was a much more fundamental understanding, and the Watchmen movie lent itself to his directorial style more than the Superman franchise, but the love still shone through. He clearly loves Superman. He loves the DC universe, and it does show. I just didn't care for them as much as I did the Marvel movies that were coming out in the MCU. So I want to just, take that concept and just kind of put it aside for a moment and shift gears to a slightly different one, and that's the notion that the Justice League movie was probably doomed from the start. Again, Marvel had set a pretty high bar, but the fact of the matter is it was willing to take risks, and it was willing to lay enough of the foundation available before getting all the characters together in those risky moments to really establish something quite unique. The fact is, we had, I don't remember now, 5 or 6 some odd movies before the Avengers. We had Iron Man, we had Edward Norton's Hulk, we had Thor, we had Captain America, the first Avenger, so on and so forth. We had several movies come out that we got introduced to the characters slowly in their own world before bringing them together. So by the time they got together, we had a foundational understanding of who they were, how they got there, what they were all about, and we were able to use that to determine how well they would actually gel together. And of course, the arc of the movie is they didn't until they had to, and then they did. It felt like the DC universe wanted to capitalize on that without taking the risks and without doing the work. And that's not how this works. I mean, the whole idea of Marvel's cinematic universe, especially when we get to things like Endgame, some odd 18 movies before that one hit, But would that one have worked without them? Absolutely not. So the notion of having a franchise of films 18 deep to get to that moment was unheard of in all of Hollywood. We never have seen that happen before. We've never seen this collaboration of projects come together in such a way that we are willing to, the studios are willing to risk having, 6 movies here and then 14 movies here and then 18 movies here to bring them all together and bring them home and then continue on down the line. Marvel really did something extraordinarily unique in how much it developed that process. And for DC to come in and say, we want to do the same, but we don't want to go through those steps, it was kind of doomed from the start. The only 2 characters that we had any foundational knowledge of before Justice League was Superman and Wonder Woman. Batman, not quite so much. We only really kind of got to know him at the tail end of his story as we got the Batman vs. Superman movie. We didn't really get any kind of establishment, which we somehow still got the parents getting shot in the alleyway scene, but we didn't get anything further than that in terms of determining who he is, what he's about, how he got to the point that he is at. There was a lot of hints and a lot of subtext, but no real story. We didn't build the foundational elements. And even if we had, that would have still been only 3 of the characters. We didn't get anything on Cyborg, which we absolutely should have. We didn't get anything on the Flash, which we also absolutely should have. So we have a lot of missing pieces of this puzzle before we're trying to put this puzzle in with another puzzle or another 5 puzzles before we bring them all together. And it wasn't willing to do the work. And not just in terms of stories told, but also in risks taken. As happy as I am to see Zack Snyder's Justice League, I honestly wish that we hadn't. And not that I wish that his cut hadn't come out. I wish that he hadn't been attached to it at all. I've already copped to my pros and cons of Zack Snyder as a director, and I have nothing terribly against him, but I still think that some of the projects preceding Justice League should have been helmed by different people. The only one that we had different was Wonder Woman, directed by Patty Jenkins. And I think that it should have been different. It should have been more than that. We should have had every film directed by somebody that loved the genre and had a vision and an ideal, but was, had their own unique style. And we should have had more of those movies. We should have had different directors handle different characters and different establishments so that by the time Justice League happened, fine, maybe Zack Snyder. But by the time that happened, maybe Zack Snyder had taken care of Superman and Batman was done by somebody else and Cyborg somebody else, Flash somebody else, so on and so forth, so that we get a grand establishment of different styles, different characters, foundational knowledge, and then they get brought all together. The fact that that didn't happen served to the DC's detriment. So when 2017's Justice League came out, I felt like there were 2 major problems with it. One is we had no foundational core elements of the characters, and 2, nothing really felt like it was high stakes. The character, the big baddie of Steppenwolf, didn't really feel much like a big baddie. There wasn't really anything that screamed, end of the world, you must unite and save things like that. There were a lot of, elements that just didn't sit right, and nothing about it felt grand. Nothing about it felt dire. There were no stakes that I really latched onto at any rate. And then without character foundations to meet those conflicts and approach those stakes and try to rise above, I checked out. But by the time Superman came in, it was just kind of, okay, I guess. It almost seemed unnecessary at that point, and he just kind of was, plink, 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 done. Which really highlighted how shitty of the enemy Steppenwolf actually was. Okay, so a lot of groundwork laid, and now let's talk about Zack Snyder's Justice League. As far as it being 4 hours long, I think that it was making up for a lot of the sins that I've already covered, which is one of the reasons that I already covered them. It tried to establish a lot of those character foundations that should have been done way earlier, should have been kept to their own movies with their different directors, different styles, and so forth, So this had a lot of catching up to do. So the fact that it was 4 hours long, but did that, made it very forgivable to me. I was watching things unfold in a way that was absent from the 2017 version, very noticeably absent, and needed to be there. So the fact that it was there, and yes, a bit slow because that's a lot of character development to cram into the first 2/3 of a movie, the fact that it was there, I was on board with. And I still am. There were a lot of elements that were taken out. That was one of the big things about watching this version, is it really highlighted what Joss Whedon decided to remove and decided to change. And I honestly wonder what the fuck he was thinking. The idea of taking Ray Fisher's character of Cyborg and just completely stripping him of any backstory, any emotion, anything along those lines was just tragic. Because in Zack Snyder's version, he absolutely is a very rich and worthwhile character, and it should have had that exploration kept in. Same with The Flash. Again, it would have been better as their own movies. But the fact that it was actually addressed and fostered and cared for, it works. Would I have enjoyed sitting through a 4-hour-long movie in the theater? Probably not, and I doubt that it would have ever gotten into the theaters as a 4-hour cut. But I'm still glad that we got the version that we did. And now, as far as the aspect ratio, what I will say about that is two things. First of all, we didn't lose any screen content. This wasn't a situation where it was filmed in widescreen and then pan and scanned or just completely cropped and with loss of area. And it never felt like I was actually missing content. Or having the weird pan and scan movement of like multiplicity. So it never really jarred me in that regard. I mean, Zack Snyder's thing about superheroes stand tall, so it makes sense to not have a wide, it makes sense to have a tall, and then, taking the native IMAX format and bringing it into the home, things like that. Okay, fine, I guess. I mean, if we had actually had a widescreen format, then it could be argued that that would have been cropped. That would have taken the native filming format of IMAX and chopped it at the top and bottom so that it would have fit our screens. So, I mean, there's an argument to be made there. I still think it was not necessarily the right way to go, but okay. The fact of the matter is, once it got past the first 5 or 6 minutes of the movie, aside from a few scenes where it kind of jumped out a little bit, I completely forgot the format even existed. I mean, it was just me watching a movie at that point and getting absorbed in the story. So I'm not going to say that it was the best idea in the world. I can kind of see where he's coming from. I don't know. I would have made the same decision, but I'm not a film director. So, I'm just an armchair quarterback, and I can say safely that it did not detract from the movie. For what it's worth, that's just my opinion on that. The other thing that it did was establish higher stakes, or at least a level of conflict and engagement that felt worthwhile, felt like this was something that needed to be overcome and was a grand... Okay, Steppenwolf is still a shitty enemy, but he's kind of designed to be a shitty enemy. He's not the big bad. He's kind of the second lieutenant, once crossed over kind of thing of the big bad. He's on the same level as Ronan the Accuser in Guardians of the Galaxy. He's not supposed to be the big bad. And how Ronan the Accuser was kind of the shitty enemy that led to Thanos, Steppenwolf is the shitty enemy that leads to the grander enemy of the big story arc. So the fact that that was kept in Zack Snyder's version, the fact that we have this second lieutenant asshole bad that we're going to be making the core conflict of this contained storyline, but still show the person above him, still show the big enemy and the threat that poses if this second lieutenant succeeds in his endeavor, that raised the stakes. That created a much more engaging conflict, and it was a pretty simple, well, not addition, but for some reason, subtraction from Joss Whedon's version. And I can't really wrap my head around why he did that. It wasn't a huge amount of screen time that was taken up. It just felt like a choice that just took the wind out of all the conflict. So when I was watching Zack Snyder's version and watching how things unfolded and the strength at which these characters and the enemies had, it allowed for that to resonate more. It allowed for the conflict to seem more impactful and for the stakes to seem higher. And in that regard, the engagement to grab me more. It felt like we actually had these heroes that needed to come together because alone they absolutely could not overcome things. So, in quick synopsis here, just kind of wrapping up my thoughts, is this the Justice League movie that I wish that we had gotten? No. Is it much better than the 2017 release? In my opinion, heads and tails better. Is this the best movie Zack Snyder's done? Also no. But when we have a director who had this grand scope of a vision and had to walk away from it due to family tragedy, and had the opportunity to come back in and release it in a no-holds-barred, here's what I would have done if I wasn't restricted by format and ratio and time, and really bring something to screen that was very special, and then dedicate it to his daughter, Autumn. Well, I really think that that's something noteworthy. And I'm glad to have watched it. And I do recommend it. I think that it was not the best superhero movie that I've seen, but it was a good movie. And that's much more than I can say for the 2017 release of Justice League. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you on my next review or video or whatever it may be. Remember, next time you want to watch any movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.